I thought I was selecting a humble, unremarkable apartment for a short work trip when I booked a listing in Portland's Alberta Arts District. The description promised a quiet, cozy space with exposed brick, vintage fixtures, and a private feel. I needed a calm environment to prepare for important presentations, so I dismissed any niggling doubts about its anonymity. I arrived in the early afternoon and met the host, Derek Mullins. Mid-30s, clean-cut, friendly enough. He gave a thorough tour, pointing out the retro light fixtures, the small kitchenette, and suggesting local cafes. Everything seemed professional, timely, responses to messages reinforcing my confidence. Still, I noted how his gaze lingered as if memorizing details, but shrugged off my unease. The first night passed without incident. On the second, around midnight, I was jolted awake by deliberate footsteps directly beneath my bedroom. They weren't random creaks or distant neighbors. These were measured steps followed by a heavy scrape, as if furniture was being moved. My pulse quickened, and I pressed my ear to the floor, heart pounding in the silent apartment. I texted Derek immediately. Within minutes, he replied, "Old building, lots of settling noises. The basement is just storage." His quick, detailed answer felt rehearsed. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every subtle noise until dawn. During the morning light, I obsessed over the apartment's layout, mentally tracing walls and floors. Over the next day, small inconsistencies surfaced. The pantry seemed oddly deep. Rearranging cans and boxes, I felt the back wall shift beneath my fingertips. The plaster felt hollow. My curiosity and dread grew. That night, when the footsteps resumed in the familiar pattern, footsteps, dragging sound, then abrupt silence, I knew I had to investigate. Creeping into the kitchen, I moved aside pantry items and found a hairline crack outlining a concealed door. Pushing it, a rush of cool, damp air hit me. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, lit only by the faint glow from above. Fear warred with an irresistible compulsion to see what lay below. Step by step, I descended on a wobbly wooden stair. At the bottom, the space was surprisingly inhabited. A worn mattress on the concrete floor, a folding chair, a small folding table scattered with handwritten journals, and rows of prescription bottles labeled to Derek Mullins. It was someone's secret quarters, hidden directly beneath where I slept. My stomach churned as I rifled through journals. Pages documented observations of guests, arrival dates, routines, sleep habits. New guest checked in today. Sarah M. from Seattle, works in marketing. Names and details recorded with clinical precision. The entries shifted from detached notes to obsessive scrutiny, especially about a guest named Jessica Chen, who stayed 3 months earlier. The final entry froze my blood. Jay figured it out. Had to make the tenant disappear. Buried her with the others behind the shed. I found Jessica's driver's license in a drawer. A kind-eyed woman aged 26, gone without public trace. Realizing I might be next, adrenaline surged. I pushed the journals aside and began to close the hidden door, heart hammering. Then I heard Derek's voice upstairs. "Everything okay?" I saw the light. Calm, concerned tone that felt predatory now. I paused, caught between flight and confrontation. Climbing back, I emerged into the kitchen as he entered, carrying a six-pack as a welcome gift. His eyes pinned me in place, studying my face. I forced a tired smile and said I was fine. He pressed politely, unnervingly insistent. "You look pale. Long day?" I nodded, voice shaky, and he left, closing the door behind him. His casual departure sealed my resolve. I grabbed my suitcase and fled to a nearby hotel, dialing 911 as soon as I reached safety. The police arrived at the apartment and descended into the hidden space. They found Derek attempting to destroy journals. Behind the garden shed, they uncovered Jessica's remains and evidence of other victims. Investigators concluded Derek had used Airbnb to target isolated guests, surveilling them before bookings. He'd planned my stay long in advance. At trial, details emerged of his meticulous methods, studying guest profiles, listening for clues, constructing a hidden basement lair beneath unsuspecting visitors. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. I remain haunted by the hidden basement's silence. Even now, I replay every subtle detail. His lingering gaze, the odd pantry depth, the midnight footsteps. Small instincts saved me. I learned that trusting gut feelings and noticing inconsistencies can mean the difference between life and death. I still check locks, scan rooms for hidden spaces, and rise at the slightest creak. The memory of that concealed door and the journals, documenting my life before I knew them, haunts me. Sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who hand you the keys. I'm Rebecca, and what happened in that Miami Beach penthouse still haunts me. What seemed like a dream rental became my worst nightmare, revealing a shocking truth behind luxury glass and marble. Last October, I needed an extended stay for a full work project in Miami Beach. I found a luxury penthouse at an unbelievably low rate. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Biscayne Bay, marble countertops gleamed in photos, and stylish furnishings promised comfort. The host, Carlos Mendez, described himself as a globe-trotting businessman sharing his lavish space. I should have questioned the bargain. On arrival, the lobby's glossy marble masked emptiness. The elevator carried me to the 15th floor, where I stepped into the penthouse. The view was breathtaking. Carlos greeted me with polished charm, wearing a tailored shirt and watch. He led me on a tour. Automated blinds, high-end kitchen appliances, elegant living area, emphasizing privacy. His eyes held an intensity that made me uneasy, even as I admired the space. The first week passed with surreal calm. The silence felt unnatural. I never heard neighbors, footsteps, or distant traffic. Corridors remained deserted whenever I checked. One evening, I pressed my ear to the door and heard only my breath. Insomnia crept in as I lay awake, unsettled by perfect quiet. By the second week, unease deepened. The elevator paused on empty floors with lights flickering. Through the peephole, shadows moved, but no one appeared when I opened the door. Utility trucks arrived at odd hours via a service entrance. I noted each detail, feeling dread tighten in my chest. I began waking at odd hours, scanning the hallway, imagining sinister possibilities hidden out of sight. Drawing on my consulting experience, I checked public utility data. Electricity usage suggested constant occupancy across units, yet water consumption was minimal. It defied logic. I realized something was wrong, anxiety surging as I questioned every detail of the penthouse. Late one evening, I heard whispers through vents. I followed the sound to a service corridor behind the elevator. Peering through a panel, I saw Carlos and two men pushing covered carts. The forms beneath looked human. I stumbled back, adrenaline spiking as fear and resolve collided. Determined to uncover the truth, I set up recording devices. Laptop webcam toward the entrance, phone camera hidden on a shelf, a small camera tucked behind a plant. I encrypted backups and emailed copies to secure accounts, aware digital traces might betray me. Carlos had security cameras, but he did not know I was watching. Each recording felt like a gamble with my life. Over the next 2 days, I captured footage of unconscious people move through service areas at night, faces blank and lifeless. They were carried silently between floors, as if processed through an assembly line. My stomach churned. This was human trafficking. Fear warred with determination as I gathered evidence, aware I might be discovered. Nightmares replayed the images, but I forced myself to continue. One night, Carlos knocked unexpectedly, carrying wine as a gesture. His casual manner contrasted sharply with my terror. He commented on my pale appearance, asking if I needed anything. I forced a calm reply, hiding panic. When he left, I packed recordings to remote storage and planned my exit. My hands trembled as I powered off devices and slipped them into my bag. Before dawn, I sent an anonymous tip to federal authorities, attaching clips and observations. I left quietly, heart pounding as I locked the door. I feared any delay could cost lives, so I avoided attention as I departed. 2 days later, news broke of an FBI raid. 37 victims were rescued. Missing persons cases linked to that building came into focus. Investigation revealed Carlos's scheme, using shell companies to acquire multiple units, soundproofing them, and exploiting silence to traffic people. Previous guests had vanished without explanation. He targeted travelers unlikely to be missed quickly, I still receive updates from agents confirming my evidence was pivotal. Carlos and accomplices received severe sentences. Relief mingles. With lasting dread, I replay every detail. Silent corridors, odd elevator stops, the too good to be true price. I survived by trusting instincts and noticing inconsistencies I might once have ignored. Now, whenever I see an unusually cheap rental, I pause and recall that penthouse. I think of hidden horrors behind fine decor. The most terrifying truths hide behind ordinary doors masked by opportunity. I remain vigilant, scanning rooms for surveillance, checking floors beneath my feet, listening for sounds that do not belong. The memory keeps me awake, reminding me that awareness and courage can turn a lucky break into a life-saving revelation. Afterward, I sought therapy to cope with nightmares. I volunteer with anti-trafficking organizations and share my experience to raise awareness. Each time I speak or warn friends about too good to be true deals, I recall the penthouse. I hope my story helps others trust instincts daily. When the listing mentioned a transformative communal retreat in the Colorado mountains, I felt both intrigued and skeptical. As a writer craving solitude, I rarely sought community, yet something about its description drew me in during a period of creative block last fall. I had negotiated deadlines and saved expenses to justify an escape from city distractions. Discovering a remote cabin 3 hours from Denver at a modest price felt unexpected. Reviews praised an incredible community atmosphere and life-changing experience. I imagined writing by the fireplace and perhaps meeting kindred spirits. I packed notebooks, snacks, and a small camera, unaware how deceptive first impressions could be. The drive was breathtaking. Winding roads through aspens turning gold, crisp air filling my lungs. When I arrived, the cabin appeared perfect. Rustic wood and stone construction, large windows revealing a sweeping valley, and a warm interior, with a stone fireplace. Yet I noticed odd details. 6 used toothbrushes in the holder, clothes in the closet not mine, flannel shirts, hiking boots of various sizes, and children's jackets. On the mantel were family photographs of strangers smiling in group photos. Later that afternoon, James, the host, arrived with a warm smile. He explained their philosophy of overlapping stays to foster connection. "We welcome guests into a shared family atmosphere," he said, eyes too bright. He pointed to empty chairs around a fire pit and suggested evening conversations with neighbors. Unsettled, I recalled reviews praising bonding but wondered why none of those guests were present, yet their belongings remained. I decided to observe silently and remain polite. That first night, silence enveloped the cabin. No wind rustling leaves, no distant wildlife, only the hum of my own thoughts. Sleep was difficult. I woke repeatedly to check the locks. At dawn, I found fresh coffee and muffins waiting in the kitchen with a handwritten note. "Welcome to our family." I had heard no footsteps. A chill ran through me as I scanned empty rooms, imagining hidden presences. Over the next days, subtle disturbances deepened my unease. Personal items shifted. My notebook moved. My laptop closed when I had left it open. Photographs multiplied. New smiling faces appeared on shelves and tables. On solitary hikes along ridges, I glimpsed figures standing motionless among trees, watching from a distance before disappearing. Attempts to research James online revealed mentions of shell companies and multiple property records, but no verifiable background. Isolation felt dangerous, yet I stayed vigilant. On the 5th morning, seeking extra blankets, I discovered a concealed door behind a bookshelf in the study. It swung open to a windowless chamber. Inside lay suitcases, purses, cell phones, and driver's licenses in disarray. Walls were plastered with photographs and notes. Entries like "Lisa, day 10, adapting well," or "Mark, resisted integration, relocated 10/15, alongside red stamps reading "failed conversion." Beside dates, my hands shook as I photographed every detail, though no signal reached my phone. Fear surged. This was no ordinary retreat, but a trap. Footsteps sounded on the porch shortly after. James called. Time for our evening gathering. Panic gripped me. I closed the hidden door and returned to the main room, forcing calm. He appeared with 6 others. Men, women, even a teenager, each wearing a calm, practiced expression. They spoke softly about a coming crisis, about preserving worthy participants through integration. Their words felt rehearsed. A woman offered herbal tea that smelled unfamiliar. I sipped slowly while planning escape, heart pounding. After they left late that night, I tested my car and discovered tampering under the hood. They had disabled it. Darkness offered cover. I packed essentials and slipped out toward a faint trail I had scouted earlier. Branches scratched my skin. Rough terrain tested my resolve, but fear propelled me forward. Guided by my phone's flashlight, I hiked through the woods until I reached a dirt road at dawn. A passing driver gave me a ride to town, where I reported everything to the police. Authorities raided the cabin 3 days later. 17 arrests followed. Investigators uncovered remains of 12 victims buried around the property. Former guests missing across multiple states. Evidence showed James had lured travelers with promises of community, imprisoning them for forced integration. Those who resisted were killed. Relief washed over me, yet dread remained. In the aftermath, I replay every detail. James's unnerving smile, empty chairs waiting, toothbrushes lined up, and that hidden room. I survived by trusting instincts and noticing inconsistencies I might have dismissed. Now, booking lodging fills me with caution. I scrutinize photos for anomalies, read reviews with skepticism, and share warnings with friends. I volunteer with local safety groups, hoping others avoid similar peril. Sometimes I still wake at night, heart racing as memories resurface. But I also remember that vigilance and courage turned a deceptive refuge into my escape. I remain cautious every single day. My name is Claire. I worked overnight shifts at Target for about 3 months last year. It was just restocking shelves and moving boxes from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The pay was low, but the quiet hours appealed to me. I often noticed small details others missed, so it was surprising when I saw something odd. Every morning after my shift, I saw certain aisles looking more than just neat. The electronics aisle, home goods near the back, and a random kitchen aisle looked perfectly arranged, down to the last item. No one had been assigned to those sections. I asked my supervisor, but he just said the night crew was improving. I knew there was no crew there. Then I noticed the cameras. The ones monitoring those aisles went dark every night at exactly 2:17 a.m. and came back online at 3:04 a.m., always for 47 minutes. At first I thought it was a glitch, but it repeated night after night. Curiosity grew faster than caution. One Tuesday, when my sister texted me about her work drama, I decided to investigate. At 2:17 a.m., I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the back of the store. The dark aisles felt larger. Shadows stretched across empty shelves, and every echo of my steps made my heart pound. I reached the perfect aisles. Everything looked normal, clean and organized, but normal felt strange in that silence. I noticed patterns in the dust on the floor. Footprints led toward a fold-down maintenance ladder I had never seen lowered before. The rungs had fresh marks, as if someone climbed often. I paused, considering retreat. Fear urged me away, but I pressed on. I climbed into the storage area above the main floor. It was cramped and shadowy, filled with old boxes, unused decorations, and forgotten equipment. Deeper inside, I found a sleeping bag neatly set up. A small stash of food like granola bars, crackers, and water bottles. Someone lived here. Someone took from the store to survive, it seemed. Nearby was a notebook open to a page covered in handwriting I recognized from our break room suggestion box. It listed details about employees, schedules, cars, family troubles, even things I had only shared with my sister. Some details about Mike's divorce, Jenny's classes, and other private matters. The pages sent a chill through me. Even worse were photographs taken through skylights, images of us working, parking lots, and staff leaving after shifts. Dates on the backs went back months. I felt exposed, like someone had been watching me constantly. A soft sound broke my focus. Footsteps on the ladder below. I switched off my flashlight and hid behind boxes. My breath felt loud. Through a gap, I saw a coworker moving among boxes in the living space, organizing more supplies. They used a small flashlight too, careful not to shine it in my direction. Seeing their clothing confirmed it was someone I knew from work. I stayed hidden until they left. When the lights returned at 3:04 a.m., I waited another hour before climbing down. I walked back through the dark store with my mind racing. I quit the next day, telling Mike I found a better job. I could not keep working there knowing someone watched us like subjects in an experiment. Driving past that Target now gives me chills. I wonder if they still live above the aisles, watching new night crew. I hope whoever works there after me stays unaware. The cameras probably still blink off at 2:17 a.m. and back on at 3:04 a.m. Maybe someone else will notice. Maybe they will act faster than I did. Working overnight meant long hours alone in dim aisles. The store felt vast and empty except for distant hums and occasional intercom whispers. I learned every corner. How the exit sign flickered at 4:22 a.m. How the air was colder near the back door. How faint noises echoed oddly at night. I had noticed dust patterns near the perfect aisles before. Footprints too careful to be random, but I did not know their meaning until later. These details made me vigilant. I often crept on breaks with my flashlight, checking shelves carefully to stay alert. After discovering the hidden living space, every flicker seemed ominous and every creak made me jump. Sleep left me. I replayed each shift, wondering if I had unknowingly crossed paths with the coworker living above. Guilt mixed with fear when I recalled sharing casual jokes or greetings. The notebook showed months of surveillance. I thought about calling police, but feared retaliation without a name. Confrontation felt impossible. Quitting seemed safest, yet the memory still haunts me. Driving past the store at night gives me chills. I hope I never learn who watched us all those nights. I worked at Target for about 2 years. Night shifts mostly. I'm not gonna lie, I needed the money and they paid decent for closing. But man, I wish I never took that job. The fitting rooms were always weird during closing. Like, you know how some places just feel off? That's how those rooms felt, empty but not really empty, if that makes sense. I always rushed through checking them. My co-worker Jessica used to joke that the mirrors looked like they were watching us back, but I never thought it was funny. One night in October, I think it was a Tuesday, I was doing my usual sweep before we locked up. All the fitting rooms were supposed to be empty and unlocked. Store policy, you know? But room number 4 was locked from the inside. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Nothing. The silence felt thick, heavy. You know that feeling when you're calling someone's name in an empty house? That's what it was like. I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and for some reason that made it worse. I used my master key and pushed the door open. The room was completely empty. No clothes, no person, nothing. But there was this hole in the back wall. Perfect circle, about the size of a quarter. Fresh wood shavings were still on the floor, and I could smell sawdust. I bent down and looked through it. I could see straight into our employee break room. The table where we ate lunch, the coffee machine, everything. I remember thinking about how many times I'd sat at that table, eating my sandwich, having no idea someone could be watching. My manager Dave was still there, so I told him right away. He got this weird look on his face. Not surprised, more like annoyed. He said he'd handle it and told me to finish closing. But he kept glancing toward the fitting rooms while I was talking to him. Next morning, the hole was patched. Perfect paint job, like nothing happened. Dave pulled me aside and made me sign some paper about routine maintenance issues and keeping quiet about it. Said it was just old building stuff. The paper had big, fancy letterhead, like from a law office or something. But I started noticing things after that. There were these customers who came in regularly. Same faces, week after week. They'd grab random clothes and head straight to the fitting rooms. Always the ones near employee areas. They'd stay in there for like 30, 40 minutes. Way too long, you know? The tall guy with the gray beard always picked up the same size. Shirt, extra large, even though he looked more like a medium. The woman with short red hair would take kids' clothes into the fitting room. Made no sense. I started writing down their descriptions in my phone. Times they came in, which rooms they used, how long they stayed. I even took a few pictures when they weren't looking. Probably not legal, but I was getting paranoid. When I tried to tell Dave about the pattern, he moved me to electronics. Said I was overthinking customer behavior, and it wasn't my job to worry about it. But electronics was on the other side of the store, far from the fitting rooms, far from the break room. The electronics department was boring, mostly just standing around helping people find phone chargers. But it gave me time to think and watch. I started noticing how Dave would walk by the fitting rooms more often than normal, how he'd nod at certain customers. 2 weeks later, I was cleaning the employee bathroom and found a tiny camera behind the paper towel dispenser. Not one of our security cameras. This was different, smaller, hidden. Had a little red light that blinked every few seconds. I quit the next day. Dave tried to convince me to stay, offered me a raise, better hours, whatever I wanted. But the way he looked at me when I mentioned the camera, like he already knew about it, like he was calculating something in his head. I never reported it to corporate or the police. I probably should have. But I was scared. What if they were watching me too? What if there were more cameras I didn't know about? What if Dave had connections with corporate? Sometimes I drive past that Target. The fitting rooms are still there. People still use them. I wonder if they know. I wonder if the holes are still there, just better hidden. I wonder if Dave still works there. I work at a grocery store now. Day shifts only. No fitting rooms. No cameras in weird places as far as I know. But I still check bathroom stalls for cameras. Old habits, I guess. My girlfriend thinks I'm paranoid, but she doesn't know the whole story. Some things are better left unsaid. I've worked retail for like 6 years now. Different stores, different managers, same drama. But what happened to my coworker Sarah at Target still haunts me. Sarah worked the customer service desk. Sweet girl, maybe 22. Always wore bright, pink scrunchies. She clicked her pen when nervous, and that week she clicked it more than usual. I had handled odd customers before, weird returns and rude shoppers. I thought I knew how to stay calm. I noticed shifts in energy at the store, small changes in coworkers' behavior after Sarah's deliveries began. It started with a return on Tuesday afternoon. A man came with a KitchenAid mixer costing around $300. He seemed off, looking over his shoulder and tapping fingers. Sarah processed it because policy said to. Receipt matched, and serial numbers looked right. Later, she said the numbers felt too clean, almost fake. 3 days later, Sarah called me, frantic. The same mixer sat on her apartment doorstep with a note. Thanks for your help. Now we're even. No delivery truck, no knock, just the box left. Outside. She brought it back to work. We checked our system. Nothing. No record of the transaction. No receipt in the database. It was like it never happened, but we both remembered. Then deliveries began. Expensive items appeared at her place. Bluetooth speakers, a tablet, designer handbags. Each time with the same note and handwriting. She never ordered anything. She brought the items to work, showed us the notes, asked what to do. The police would not help, saying free gifts are not theft. She explained the erased record, but they dismissed her. I started staying late with Sarah. She was afraid to walk to her car alone. She checked the parking lot multiple times before leaving, always looking over her shoulder. She stopped going out for lunch and ate at her desk. She said she felt watched. One evening after closing, we noticed a small card taped to the service desk window. It read, "Nice work today. We see you too." No signature. Sarah's hands shook, reading it. We never saw anyone tape it. The security cameras did not record anything unusual at closing. The final delivery was the worst. A professional-grade security camera system arrived at her door. A note said, "So you can see us coming next time." That felt like a threat. Someone wanted her to know they watched. She quit the next morning without notice. She packed fast and left town. I heard she moved to Arizona to feel safer. I still hear from Sarah sometimes. She texts photos of her doorstep. They are always empty. But she says she hears packages at night, footsteps on stairs, then silence. She is too frightened to call the police again. After she left, I transferred departments. Customer service felt cursed. Now every return makes me tense, especially expensive ones. I check serial numbers twice and study faces too long. Every odd customer makes me uneasy. I imagine someone watching my reactions. My co-workers whispered about Sarah. Some thought she overreacted, others seemed uneasy. I listened for rumors but found none that made sense. The silence around her story made it worse. I felt isolated, fearing I might be next, yet unsure how to share my worry. I replay events in my mind, wondering who that man was and what he wanted. Was he testing Sarah or sending a message? Did he choose her by chance or plan? I think about the cameras. What if someone manipulated the system? Maybe evidence was erased. At night when I close up, I feel eyes on me. Empty aisles feel full of shadows. I check corners before leaving. I walk quickly to my car and lock doors before sitting. My phone is in hand in case I need help. Sometimes I dream of packages on my doorstep. I wake sweating, relieved it was a dream, but fear stays. I imagine notes left with my name, reminders. Someone watched me. I avoid sharing schedule or plans. I feel exposed. My anxiety followed me home. I double-checked locks and windows each night. The fear crept into everyday life. I wonder how long this horror will last. I still wonder if that man is out there choosing a new employee to terrorize. I fear the pattern is not over. Maybe someone at work is involved, manipulating records and cameras, watching for months for a twisted purpose. But maybe it was one deranged person targeting Sarah. Maybe she was unlucky. Maybe I will never know the truth. Maybe the serial numbers were fine and this was random. Maybe I should move on. Maybe forever. I've always prided myself on being observant, but what happened at that rental house still makes me question everything I thought I knew about ordinary suburban life. After my divorce finalized last spring, I needed a fresh start somewhere affordable. The Craigslist ads seemed too good to be true. A 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood for $800 below market rate. When I called, the landlord was almost desperate to get someone moved in. He mentioned the previous tenant had left suddenly, but assured me everything was perfect. I should have asked more questions. The first month was exactly what I needed. Quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and enough space to rebuild my life. I worked from home, spent evenings unpacking boxes, and slowly began to feel like myself again. The house felt normal, lived in but not haunted by someone else's presence. Then the visitors started coming. The first knock came at 12:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Through the peephole, I saw a man in his 40s wearing a wrinkled suit, shifting his weight impatiently. When I asked what he wanted through the door, his response chilled me. "I need to speak with Marcus Torres. We have unfinished business." I explained that Marcus no longer lived here. The man's laugh was dry, humorless. "Look, I know he's in there. Marcus owes my client $15,000, and we're not leaving until we get it." No amount of explaining convinced him. He circled the house twice, checking windows, before finally leaving. I called the landlord the next morning, but he just said some people take time to update their records. The second visit came 4 days later. 2 men this time, around 2 a.m., claiming Marcus had borrowed money for inventory. They knew details about the house that unnerved me. Which bedroom had the loose floorboard, that the basement door stuck, unless you lifted the handle. When I threatened to call police, one smiled and said, "Marcus probably told you we'd say that." I started researching Marcus Torres online. The trail was frustratingly thin. No social media profiles, no public records, beyond basic property searches. It was as if he'd existed just enough to sign a lease, then vanished. The most disturbing visit came on a Thursday night. I was working late when I heard keys jingling at the back door. My blood went cold. I'd had the locks changed when I moved in, or so I thought. The door opened, and a woman in her 50s walked into my kitchen like she owned the place. She seemed genuinely surprised to see me sitting at the table with my laptop. "Where's Marcus?" she asked, not threatened, just confused. "He doesn't live here anymore." "Who are you?" How did you get in? She held up a set of keys. Marcus was storing something for me in the basement. A blue plastic container. I need it back. I stood up, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. I don't know anything about that. You need to leave. Her laugh was soft, almost pitying. Honey, Marcus made promises that come with this property. The arrangements don't just disappear because he's not answering his phone. She walked to the basement door, testing the handle. I'll be back Friday night. Find my container, or we'll find it together. Before leaving, she placed a business card on my counter. Just a phone number, no name. You have 1 week. I spent the next day frantically searching the basement. Behind old paint cans, I found scratches on the concrete floor where something heavy had been dragged. There were also newer marks, as if items had been moved recently. I called Marcus's former workplace. His supervisor said he'd stopped showing, up 3 months ago. No notice, no forwarding information. The utility companies had no record of service transfers. His mail was being forwarded to an address that, when I drove by, turned out to be an empty lot. Marcus Torres hadn't just left suddenly. He'd disappeared entirely. The visitors became more frequent. Different people, always after midnight, all claiming Marcus owed them something. Money, favors, items stored in my house. They spoke about him with familiarity and frustration that suggested long-standing relationships I didn't want to understand. Last night, someone tried to break into the basement through the exterior entrance. I heard scraping metal and footsteps on the concrete stairs. When I turned on the outdoor lights, I saw 3 figures moving away from the house with practiced stealth. I'm writing this from a hotel room. Whatever Marcus Torres was involved in, his creditors have decided I'm a reasonable substitute for settling his debts. The woman with the keys called yesterday, and her message was simple. The week's up. We're coming tonight. I've left the forwarding address blank on my lease termination. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some debts aren't worth inheriting. But I still think about that blue container, and what could be valuable enough to make people this persistent. Part of me wonders if Marcus Torres ever really existed at all, or if he was just a name designed to draw people like me into arrangements we never understood we were making. Some warnings sound too crazy to believe until it's too late to matter. There's something profoundly unsettling about realizing that the person you trust most, yourself, has been systematically deceived. I used to sleep soundly, confident that my apartment was a sanctuary, that locked doors meant privacy, that my elderly neighbor across the hall was nothing more than a harmless, quiet man. But over the course of 3 terrifying months, those assumptions crumbled. What I thought was paranoia became undeniable. What I thought was overthinking became reality. The human mind is good at protecting itself. When something feels wrong, but doesn't make sense, we create innocent explanations. We blame ourselves. A moved object becomes forgetfulness. An unlocked door is just distraction. A strange sound? Just the building settling. But eventually, there's too much to excuse. When I first moved into Riverside Apartments, I was relieved. I'd just gone through a bad breakup and needed a fresh start. The unit was on the 2nd floor, had great natural light, and came partially furnished, which was perfect. It felt like a safe, quiet place where I could begin again. Mr. Chen lived directly across the hall. He was in his 70s, always. Neat and polite, wearing pressed slacks and button-up shirts. His door was painted the same beige color as mine, but somehow, it always felt like his presence made the hallway colder. At first, I thought I was imagining it, how he always appeared the exact moment I got home. I'd unlock my door, and there he was, stepping into the hallway. "Good evening, Sarah," he'd say in his careful voice. "Working late again?" It felt strange. No matter what time I came home, he'd appear. Sometimes within seconds. I tried changing my schedule to throw him off, but it never mattered. He was always there, always watching. 3 weeks in, I noticed my laptop had been slightly rotated on my kitchen table, just a few degrees. But I'm very particular about how I leave things. I checked the spare key under the fake plant outside, untouched. There was no forced entry, nothing missing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Then came the bedroom door. I always leave it shut when I leave, but twice in 1 week, I came home to find it slightly ajar. Same angle both times, like someone had opened it just enough to peek in. Little things kept happening. My toothbrush angled differently. My journal moved from the nightstand to the dresser. A coffee mug shifted a few inches. Prescription bottles rotated so their labels faced outward. The details were subtle, easy to dismiss, but they accumulated. My home no longer felt like mine. I started to lose sleep. The building made normal noises, sure, radiators, pipes, footsteps. But I began hearing something new. A soft, steady clicking sound inside the walls. Not pipes, not natural. Something deliberate, something mechanical. But the worst moment, the one that shattered everything, was the journal. Since the breakup, I'd been writing in it regularly. Raw thoughts, private fears, things I hadn't said out loud to anyone. One night I came home and found it in a different spot. Slightly pulled from where I left it. My stomach dropped. I knew it had been touched. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I told Mr. Chen I had a double shift at the hospital and wouldn't be back until morning. I made sure he heard me leave. The door slammed. My footsteps echoed on the stairs. But I didn't leave. Instead, I parked around the block and snuck in through the back fire escape. I crept up the metal stairs and peeked through my own living room window. What I saw still haunts me. Mr. Chen was inside my apartment. He wore latex gloves. In one hand, he held a digital camera. In the other, my journal. He was photographing, each page carefully catching the light with the lamp. Not just the journal. He photographed everything. My bills, my pills, my fridge. And then, just as carefully, he placed each item exactly where it had been. He'd done this before, probably many times. The next morning, I knocked on his door, heart pounding. When he opened it, his expression was calm, like he'd expected me. "You were in my apartment," I said. He didn't flinch. "The landlord gave me access," he said evenly. "I check on things, for safety. Previous tenants appreciated it." His tone made it worse, calm, like this was routine. I ran to Mrs. Patterson, the landlord. She was horrified. "I never gave him a key," she said. "He's lived here forever, but he's not staff. He's not allowed inside any units." When I asked about past tenants, she hesitated. 3 women broke their leases in your unit the past 2 years. They never said why. They just left suddenly. Everything made sense now. I moved out within the week. I lost my deposit, but I didn't care. I filed a report, but there was nothing they could charge him with. Photographing someone's belongings isn't illegal if he claims permission. Now, sometimes I drive past that building. Sometimes I see a light on in my old apartment and wonder if the new tenant has noticed anything, if she hears the clicking, if her journal moves, if she still feels safe. I hope she trusts her instincts before it's too late. I'm a night shift nurse at Metropolitan General, and for 2 years, I've relied on rideshare apps to get home safely after 12-hour shifts. But 3 weeks ago, something started happening that's made those late-night rides terrifying. It began with Kevin. At first, I thought it was coincidence when he picked me up for the second time. Mid-40s, clean car, polite conversation. But by the 3rd ride, I noticed he always knew it was me before I got in, never asking my name. "Hey there, heading home from another long shift?" he'd say with that same smile. The 4th time Kevin picked me up, he was driving a completely different car. Same license plate numbers, just rearranged. When I mentioned it, he laughed it off, saying he drove for multiple companies. But it felt rehearsed. Kevin started showing up every 4th ride, always in different cars with those same plate digits. He began asking personal questions. Which floor I worked on, what patients I dealt with, how long I'd lived in my building. Something about how he absorbed every detail made my skin crawl. Then he started taking longer routes. Not drastically, longer, but enough that I'd notice more direct streets. When I'd point this out, he'd blame traffic, though I never saw evidence. 15-minute rides stretched to 25. 2 weeks ago, I reported him to the rideshare company. The representative returned with an answer that made my blood run cold. "Ma'am, we don't have any driver named Kevin in our system." I gave them the license plate digits. No match. No driver by that name, No vehicle with those numbers in any configuration. But I wasn't mistaken. I'd heard him answer phone calls. "This is Kevin," every time. Last week, Kevin started demonstrating impossible knowledge. He knew I'd switched from pediatrics to ICU. He mentioned the coffee shop I'd started visiting, though I'd never taken rideshare there. He commented on my new haircut before I'd gotten in the car, though I'd had it done hours earlier. The breaking point came 3 nights ago. I'd requested a ride to my sister's house across town, somewhere I'd never been with any rideshare driver. When Kevin's face appeared in the driver's seat, my hands shook. "Different destination tonight," he said, not checking his phone. Realized Kevin was controlling which rides he received from me. I tried canceling whenever his name appeared, but the app would freeze. Last night was the worst. I requested a ride home at 2:45 a.m. Kevin's name appeared immediately. My phone glitched, GPS showing my location as a warehouse district I'd never seen. Kevin pulled up before I could figure out what was happening. As I got in, he turned with that smile, but something was different in his eyes. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about your schedule, Tuesday through Thursday nights. You stop for coffee Wednesdays around 6 p.m. Apartment 4B on Maple Street. Nice building, though that back entrance isn't as secure as you think. How do you know all that?" Kevin glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "I pay attention." He took a turn away from my apartment. "Your patient in room 314 asked about you specifically last Tuesday. Said you were the only nurse who really listened. I hadn't told anyone about that private conversation." "Let me out," I whispered. "We're almost there," Kevin replied, but we weren't headed anywhere I recognized. The door handle wouldn't budge. Child locks engaged. My phone showed no signal. Kevin hummed softly, drumming his fingers like this was perfectly normal. I don't remember how I got out. My next clear memory is standing in a diner, calling police. When they checked rideshare records, no ride had been requested that night. I'd never been in a vehicle at all. I haven't used rideshare since. I take the bus now, but sometimes I see cars slow down as they pass. Cars with familiar license plate numbers, just rearranged. The hospital installed new security cameras last week. They won't tell me why. This happened when I was a junior in high school, and I keep thinking about it now that I'm older. Maybe someone can tell me if it was as messed up as I think it was. Our history teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, got really sick. Hospitalized sick. The principal told us she'd be out for a few weeks. No big deal. Substitutes come and go all the time. Then Mr. Henderson showed up. He seemed normal at first. Quiet guy, maybe in his 40s. Same brown jacket every day. Old leather briefcase that looked like it belonged in the 80s. But he had this way of watching us. Not like a teacher. Like he was studying us. The weird stuff started in the second week. He stopped following Mrs. Rodriguez's lesson plan and gave us strange assignments instead. Photocopied sheets with crooked text, like from an old machine. Character development research, he called it. The first one was simple. Describe your daily routine. Wake up. Time. How you got to school. After-class habits. It felt like a lazy assignment, but easy enough. Then the questions got specific. Where do you live? What does your house look like? Do you have siblings? When do your parents get home? Do you walk home alone? What route do you take? One day, I raised my hand and asked, "Why do we need to write about my little sister's schedule?" He looked up, and I swear his eyes lit up. Then he smiled. Not a teacher smile. Something else. Character development research, he repeated. Understanding. Family dynamics helps us analyze historical figures better. It didn't make sense, but I was 16. What did I know? The assignments kept coming. He wanted floor plans of our homes. To understand historical living spaces. Then, descriptions of our bedrooms. Include photos, if possible. Personal. Space psychology project. My friend Jake leaned over one day and whispered, "Dude, this is getting weird." I agreed. It was weird. But here's what really got to me. Mr. Henderson started staying after school. Not grading or helping students. Just sitting in his car, watching. My mom was usually late picking me up, so I saw him a lot. Same spot. Every day. Silver Honda Civic near the back of the lot, jotting things in a notebook as kids walked by. Once, I saw him following the Patterson twins' bus, driving slowly, keeping his distance. I wanted to say something, but say what? That our sub was creepy? Adults don't listen to that kind of thing. By the third week, the questions got even worse. What were our parents' work schedules? Exact times? Did we have alarms at home? Were our neighbors gone during the day? Were we ever home alone? Every time I walked into class, my stomach twisted. But I kept doing the assignments. We all did. He was still our teacher, right? Then something happened I'll never forget. One night, I stayed late for drama club rehearsal. It ended around 5:30. The parking lot was almost empty, but Mr. Henderson's car was still there. I ducked behind a bus and watched. He was on the phone, papers spread on his dashboard. Our papers. Our assignments. I could hear a bit of what he was saying. Stuff like schedules, opportunities, and the girl with the sick grandmother. That was me. I'd written about my grandmother in one of those assignments. I felt sick. My hands shook as I ran to the other side of the school and called my mom from there. The next Monday, Mrs. Rodriguez was back. No warning, no explanation, no goodbye from Mr. Henderson. He was just gone. I went up to Mrs. Rodriguez after class and asked, "What happened to the substitute?" She blinked. "Substitute? Honey, we never had a substitute. I was only out for a week with food poisoning." My blood ran cold. "But we had assignments. Photocopied sheets. Can you show me?" I pulled out my folder from my locker. She flipped through the pages, and her face went pale. "Take these to the principal, now." The principal asked questions and made copies. A police officer visited school the next week and interviewed some of us. But here's what haunts me. When I talked to kids from other classes, they didn't remember Mr. Henderson. "We never had a sub," they said. "Mrs. Rodriguez was only out a few days." But my whole class remembered him. I still have those assignments in a box in my parents' attic. Sometimes I think about digging them up, looking at them again. It's something I struggle to shake. I catch myself glancing over my shoulder whenever I see an older man in a brown jacket. The fact that adults dismissed it still chills me. I never felt safe on that campus again. I never found out what he was planning to do with all that information about us. And honestly, I don't think I want to know. My name is Alex Rivera and I lived in Cedar Valley. I'm not trying to sound crazy here, but I need to tell someone about what happened in my senior year chemistry class. Maybe you'll think I'm making this up, but I swear everything I'm about to tell you really happened. I was enrolled in advanced chemistry with Mr. Torres, a veteran teacher of over 20 years. Students said his class was an easy A if you followed the rules and didn't ask too many questions. It was perfect for me, since I needed the credit to graduate. My lab partner was Sarah Martinez. She was meticulous, always double-checking measurements and reading safety instructions. Her notebooks were pristine, and she never missed a detail. The first few weeks were uneventful. We mixed baking soda with vinegar, observed flame tests, and practiced titrations. The lab smelled of sulfur and ammonia, but it was all routine. Still remember the fluorescent lights flickering and how the polished countertops reflected our nervous faces. The clang of metal tongs against glassware echoed ominously, and the scent of acids lingered around each station. I felt a growing tension in my chest, like something invisible pressed against my lungs. It was as though the laboratory itself was alive, watching us work. Then one afternoon, Mr. Torres unlocked a supply closet and brought out unmarked bottles. I asked what they were, and he said they were advanced compounds for college prep. The labels had chemical names I'd never seen. Sarah requested the safety data sheets, but he insisted they were standard and promised to share the details later. We accepted his answer and continued. In October, right after my sister's birthday, I arrived with frosting under my nails. We were working with a clear liquid from one of those bottles. Sarah followed every protocol, goggles on, gloves snug. 10 minutes in, she paused and frowned. "I feel dizzy," she whispered. Her voice shook, and her pupils were unusually large. She stared at the whiteboard formulas and whispered, "Do you hear that? The equations are talking." I heard only the hum of the fume hood. He rushed over, took the beaker, and announced, "Just a mild allergic reaction. Nurse's office now." His tone was firm but worried. In the hallway, I overheard his hushed phone call. "Reaction stronger than expected. Document all details." His voice was clinical, as if discussing an experiment. Sarah missed 2 weeks of school. When she returned, she was changed. Quiet, compliant, never asking questions. When I looked at Sarah, it felt like I was staring at a stranger wearing her face. Her eyes were empty, her laughter gone. The bright spark she once had was replaced by a hollow compliance that chilled me more than any chemical ever could. I tried asking what she remembered. She said only that she felt sick, and that was all she could recall. That's when I began watching Mr. Torres more closely. He carried a small notebook during labs and scribbled constantly. One day, I glimpsed his notes. My name was followed by baseline response within expected range. Sarah's page included heightened sensitivity to compound 7 and memory suppression successful. The phrase, memory suppression, sent chills down my spine. I noticed other students changing too. Jake, once fidgety, became calm. Emma, who argued with teachers, became obedient. The locked supply closet had a small window. I climbed up and saw bottles labeled Compound X47 and Subject Compliance Enhancer. The labels looked professionally printed. I snapped a photo, but later it was too blurry to read. It was as though my hands shook when I needed them steady. I remember the bitterness of the metal taste from the beakers, the cold touch of the glass, and how my heartbeat echoed in my ears every time I heard the lid click shut. Those details are branded in my memory like scars. Mr. Torres's gaze during experiments felt predatory, like a scientist observing lab rats rather than a teacher guiding students. I wanted to tell someone, parents, principal, anyone, but feared being dismissed or triggering an investigation that would tip him off. Sarah and I graduated. She moved on to college but remained distant. At graduation, I asked about that lab day, and she stared blankly, clueless about what I meant. I held onto the blurry photo for months, hoping to decode it, but eventually I deleted it, telling myself I was overreacting. I wake up at night, heart pounding, convinced I still smell solvents and hear whispers of formulas. The memory of that class haunts me like a warning. Knowledge can be weaponized by those we trust, and I wonder, if I hadn't paid attention, would I have become just another entry in that notebook? I share this now hoping someone else will believe me. I need to tell someone about this because it's been eating at me for months now. I can't sleep right anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face and that calm expression when everything went down. I worked evenings on the high school cleanup crew for gas money. My mom's car breaks down all the time. The job seemed simple. Empty trash, wipe whiteboards, mop floors. Mr. Garrett was the head custodian, quiet and hunched, with thick glasses magnifying his eyes. He nodded when our shifts overlapped, but rarely spoke. I assumed he just kept to himself. But he was always in the computer lab. Every night I worked, he sat there for hours. The door was closed and lights dim. Once I asked what he was doing, he claimed deep cleaning keyboards. I figured keyboards get filthy, but I never saw him clean anything. I only saw him hunched over a laptop, clicking and typing. Sometimes, he had multiple USB drives plugged in. I assumed he updated software. I knew nothing about computers. My buddy Jake always left his charger in that lab. One night I returned after my shift to fetch it. The main doors were locked. I had emergency keys. The hallway lights were half off to save electricity. My sneakers squeaked on the polished floor. I hate that sound. It reminds me of hospitals. I passed the computer lab and heard rapid clicking. Mr. Garrett's car remained in the lot. The door was ajar. I peered inside. He sat at a student computer with 3 USB drives attached. The screen showed a girl's Facebook page. Not his, but Sarah's from chemistry class. He clicked through her photos. Then he opened a desktop folder and dragged images into it. His focus was intense, like this was critical. Filing cabinets loomed behind him. I never noticed them before. They looked oversized for maintenance supplies. I should have left immediately. Instead, I stayed frozen. He glanced at the door nervously. Then he switched to another account. Another student's profile appeared. He knew everyone's passwords. I could barely remember mine. He took screenshots, copied files, organized them in folders. My phone buzzed, with a text from my mom. The sudden noise snapped me out of my trance. I bumped the door, and it creaked. He looked up and smiled calmly. "Oh, hey there," he said, as if nothing was wrong. He invited me inside. My legs felt heavy, though I wanted to run. He turned the laptop toward me. It displayed private Instagram DMs, messages about family drama and personal secrets. "Kids think it's private, but I observe them," he said. He clicked to reveal a girl cutting herself. Photos she sent to her boyfriend laid bare. He opened a cabinet filled with printed screenshots and photos. Hundreds of pages piled neatly in folders. "I've done this 7 years," he said proudly. Over 300 students cataloged. He flipped through records of text, posts, grades. "This one planned to run away," he explained. "This one's parents are divorcing secretly." The tone was clinical, not creepy but chilling. He analyzed behavioral patterns like a scientist. I finally whispered, "Why do you do this?" He looked surprised by the question. "Because it's fascinating to see their authentic selves," he replied. He continued revealing private details and psychological observations. My mind raced with fear and disbelief. I don't remember leaving, only that I needed to escape. I mumbled an excuse about going home. He nodded and returned to his work. I never reported him. Who would believe such a story? I was afraid he knew about me too. I quit the job the next week under the pretense of focusing on grades. But I still see him pushing his cart in hallways. He nods and smiles that same calm smile. I wonder how many more secrets he's collected, how many more files he has in those cabinets. The worst part is knowing he's still there, watching, collecting pieces of everyone's private lives, one screenshot at a time. I keep this secret to myself. I'm haunted by knowing what lurks behind locked doors. Sometimes I wake with terrible sweat, replaying his voice and those files piled high. If someone doesn't stop him, I fear his next future discoveries. I'm not really good at telling stories or anything, but what happened to me 6 months ago, I still think about it every single day. I was doing DoorDash back then, you know? Just trying to make some extra money. My car was making this weird noise whenever I turned left, but I couldn't afford to fix it yet. I had been delivering for about 6 months when I got this order. Chinese food from that place on 5th Street. The one with the faded sign that's been there forever. Nothing special about the order itself. Just some lo mein and egg rolls, but the address, man, the address led me to this apartment complex I'd never seen before. It was on the outskirts of town, past the old gas station that's been closed for years. You know the one. Still has those ancient pumps out front. The complex looked like it hadn't been maintained in decades. Half the unit numbers had fallen off, and the parking lot was covered in broken glass. I remember stepping over a rusted shopping cart someone had just left there. The customer left specific instructions in the app. Don't knock, leave food by door marked with red X. I thought it was weird, but people leave strange instructions, all the time. Sometimes they're sleeping, or they have a baby, or whatever. I found the door easily enough. Someone had spray painted this crude red X right across the peeling paint. The paint was still kind of wet looking, like it had been done recently. As I bent down to set the bag of takeout by the door, I noticed this smell. Sweet and rotten. Like meat that's been left in the sun too long. I tried to breathe through my mouth, but the smell was so strong it made my eyes water. That's when I heard it through the thin walls. What sounded like muffled sobbing. Quiet, but definitely there. My first thought was maybe someone was watching a sad movie or something. But then I remembered my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She always cries when she watches those soap operas. This didn't sound like that. This sounded different. More desperate, I guess. I know the instructions said not to knock, but I was worried. What if someone was hurt? I knocked anyway, just a gentle tap. The crying stopped immediately. Like, completely. Dead silence. Then I heard footsteps approaching the door. Slow, deliberate steps. But the door never opened. Instead, this voice whispered, through the wood, "Thank you for feeding us." The way they said "us" made my skin crawl. It was drawn out like they were savoring the word. And the voice, it didn't sound right. Too deep, too gravelly. Like someone who'd been screaming for hours. I got out of there fast. Forgot about the delivery photo. Forgot about everything. Just ran back to my car with that weird left turn noise and drove home. I remember I had to stop at a red light, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. The next morning, I was eating cereal, that generic brand stuff because I was broke, when I saw it on the news. Police had discovered 3 missing persons in an apartment complex on the outskirts of town. The reporter said they were all malnourished and showing signs of prolonged captivity. The apartment had been vacant for 2 years, according to the landlord. I recognized the building immediately. Same broken glass in the parking lot. Same rusty shopping cart. I never found out who placed that order. The account was deleted from the app by the time I checked. Customer service said they had no record of it, like it never happened. But I know it did. I can still smell that sweet, rotten smell sometimes. Usually when I'm trying to fall asleep, and I never took another delivery order after dark. The strange part is what happened afterward. Little things started bothering me in ways they never had before. A shadow moving wrong across my bedroom wall. The sound of my refrigerator humming in a rhythm that seemed almost like whispered words. My neighbor's dog barking at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night for 2 weeks straight, then stopping completely. I began noticing delivery drivers differently, too. The way they'd linger at doorsteps just a second too long. How some would glance over their shoulders before walking away. Once, I saw a Pizza Hut driver standing motionless beside his car for nearly 5 minutes, just staring at an apartment door. When I blinked, he was gone. I quit DoorDash 2 weeks later. Got a job at the hardware store downtown instead. Pays worse, but at least I know everyone who walks through that door. At least I hope I do. Sometimes I wonder if those people are grateful I brought them that food. If somehow, in that moment of horror, I accidentally did something right. But mostly, I try not to think about it at all. Because when I do, I remember that voice saying "us," and I realize I never counted how many footsteps I heard approaching that door. This happened about 6 months ago. I still think about it sometimes when I'm driving late at night. Maybe I shouldn't have taken that delivery, but you know how it is when you need the money. I'd been doing food delivery for about 2 years. At that point, nothing too crazy, just trying to pay off some student loans. The job was pretty boring most of the time, until that Tuesday night in March. The order came in around 9:30 p.m. Family meal from Romano's, you know, that Italian place near the mall. 3 large pizzas, some breadsticks, sodas. Pretty normal stuff. The address was on Maple Street, which I knew pretty well. Nice neighborhood, big houses with those perfect lawns. I delivered to the Hendersons before, maybe 3 or 4 times, over the past year. But when I pulled up to their house, something felt different. The lawn was all overgrown, which was weird because Mrs. Henderson was always out there gardening. There were newspapers scattered on the driveway, some still in plastic bags, and all the windows were dark. Not just dark like everyone's asleep, but empty dark. You know what I mean? I sat in my car for a minute, engine running. Part of me wanted to just call the customer and tell them I couldn't find the house. But the porch light was on, so maybe they were just, I don't know, having a quiet night or something. I grabbed the food and walked up to the front door. The doorbell didn't work. I could hear it was broken when I pressed it, so I knocked instead. The door opened immediately, like before I even finished knocking. This woman stood there, and I'd never seen her before. She was maybe 40, but looked older. Her hair was all messy, like she'd been running her hands through it. She was wearing this old bathrobe, and her eyes, they kept darting around, never really looking at me. "Food delivery," I said, holding up the bags. She grabbed them from me without saying anything. Then she shoved this wad of cash into my hand. I looked down and it was way too much. Like $60 for a $30 order. This is too much, I started to say. But she was already closing the door. That's when I heard it. Kids crying. Not like normal crying when you're upset about something. This was desperate. Scared crying. Coming from somewhere inside the house. The woman must have seen my face change because she stopped closing the door. "They're just upset about dinner being late," she said quickly, but her voice was shaky. I stood there for a second, listening. The crying continued, and it sounded like more than one kid. Maybe 2 or 3. And they sounded... I can't explain it right. Like they were trying to cry quietly but couldn't help it. "Is everything okay? In there?" I asked. She snapped at me then. "Mind your own business and leave." And she slammed the door. I walked back to my car, but I couldn't shake this feeling. My mom always told me to trust my gut, and my gut was telling me something was really wrong. The crying, the woman I'd never seen before, the condition of the house, none of it made sense. I called the restaurant when I got back to my car, asked them about the Henderson family, if they'd been ordering from us lately. The manager told me something that made my hands go cold. "Oh, the Hendersons? Their workplace called us 3 days ago, asking if we'd heard from them. They never showed up for work, and no one's seen them since." I hung up and called 911 immediately. Told them everything. The strange woman, the crying kids, the missing family. The dispatcher said they'd send someone right away. I waited in my car until the police arrived. 2 officers went up to the house and knocked. No answer. They knocked again, louder. Still nothing. One of them walked around to the back while the other tried the front door. It was unlocked. They went inside and came out about 10 minutes later. The house was empty. No sign of the woman I'd talked to. No sign of any kids. Just empty. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. 2 days later, I saw it on the news. The Henderson family had been found dead in their basement. All 4 of them. The parents and their 2 young kids. The coroner said they'd been dead for over a week. Over a week. I delivered food to that house. I talked to someone. I heard children crying. The police never figured out who ordered the food that night. The phone number was disconnected. The credit card was reported stolen weeks earlier. I quit delivering food the next day. Got a job at a warehouse instead. Better hours, better pay. But sometimes when I'm driving past that neighborhood, I still slow down when I get to Maple Street. The house is empty now. Has been for months. There's a for sale sign in the yard, but it never seems to sell. I've never told anyone this story except my girlfriend, and she thinks I was just stressed out or something. Maybe she's right. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. But I still have that $60. I never spent it. And sometimes, late at night, I can still hear those kids crying. My name is Ronan Miller. I lived in Cedar Falls. I used to deliver food for a living, pizza, Chinese, whatever, for about 2 years before I had to stop. And I mean had to stop. Look, I'm not the smartest guy. I barely finished high school, and my girlfriend always said I don't notice things. But even I picked up on stuff that didn't feel right. It started with one house on Maple Street. Nice place, nothing fancy. I'd bring Thai food every Tuesday and Friday like clockwork. Pad, Thai and spring rolls. I never saw the customer. Never. They'd leave an envelope taped to the door with exact change and a note saying, "Leave food on mat, thanks." I thought it was weird, but whatever. Then I noticed a tiny camera tucked inside their porch light. Not a doorbell camera everyone has now. This was smaller, hidden, pointed right where I'd stand. I began looking around on deliveries and found more cameras. Way more. The house on Oak Street with the broken mailbox had one hidden in a fake owl on the fence. The apartment complex on 3rd Avenue concealed one behind the no soliciting sign. The blue house where an old lady supposedly lived but I never saw had a camera disguised as a sprinkler head. I counted 15 houses total across different neighborhoods, and I never met the customers face to face. The instructions grew weirder. Knock 3 times and wait 30 seconds before leaving food. Stand on the X marked on the porch. Call if you don't see it. They made me stay in place longer. My hands shook when making these deliveries. I felt, watched from windows, probably was. Nights I lay awake, replaying every knock, every odd instruction, wondering who watched and why. I told my manager, he laughed. Security cameras are normal. Hidden ones? Paranoid, he said. If I didn't like it, quit. But I needed money, car payment, rent behind. My anxiety worsened, but I forced myself to work, convincing myself it was nothing. Serious and stress kept me up at night. The breaking point came one rainy Thursday night. I was at the Thai food house on Maple Street when I slipped on their wet porch. As I got up, I saw something small and black. A memory card, likely fallen from their camera. I should have left it, but curiosity won. At home, I plugged it into my laptop. The folder held hundreds of video files of delivery drivers, pizza, Chinese food, grocery, all of us. But worse were other videos mixed in. Footage of drivers at their homes, getting into cars and driveways I recognized, walking up to doors not in orders. One showed a driver I knew, Tommy, sitting in his living room watching TV. Someone had followed us, learned where we lived, recorded our personal lives. Panic surged. I felt violated, terrified of what they might do with that footage. I unplugged the laptop so fast I almost broke the USB port. I grabbed clothes and drove to my sister's, place 3 towns over. I didn't pack properly, forgot my phone charger and wore the same shirt for days. I barely spoke, haunted by images of cameras hidden everywhere. I never went back for my last paycheck. Changed my number and moved in with my sister permanently. I got a warehouse job where I don't go to random houses. Sometimes I think about how those hidden lenses might still be active, catching new drivers unaware. I imagine strangers watching, studying every move, planning something beyond my dread. I consider reporting it, but without evidence or the memory card, it feels impossible. I just hope whoever collected those videos never found what they were really looking for.
I'm 31, and I live just outside of Denver. A few weeks ago, I had to drive home late at night after a grueling business trip. It was around midnight, and I'd been on the road for hours. My eyes were heavy, my body aching from sitting for so long. The highway was almost deserted, with only the occasional car speeding by. Eventually, exhaustion got the better of me, and I decided to pull into a rest stop to stretch my legs and wake myself up. The parking lot was eerily quiet. A single streetlight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. There were only 2 cars parked there, mine and an old, beat-up minivan sitting at the far end of the lot. It looked abandoned at first, but something about it felt off. I got out of my car, shivering in the cold night air. The silence was heavy, like the world had paused around me. I stretched and yawned, trying to shake off the uneasiness creeping up my spine. That's when I heard it, a faint, muffled sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the nearby trees. But then it grew louder. It sounded like crying. I froze, glancing around the empty lot. The sound was coming from the direction of the minivan. I told myself to ignore it, to get back in my car and drive away. But something about the crying pulled me in. It was soft yet desperate, like a child in distress. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I started walking toward the minivan. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if some invisible force was urging me to turn back. The crying grew clearer, sharper, cutting through the cold night air. When I reached the van, I peered through the back window. My heart sank. There was a child inside, maybe 6 or 7 years old, banging on the glass. His face was streaked with tears, and he looked terrified. I hesitated, my mind racing. Where were his parents? Why was he alone? My gut told me something wasn't right, but I couldn't just leave him there. I reached for the door handle, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I opened the door cautiously, leaning in just enough to ask, "Hey, are you okay? Where are your parents?" The child didn't answer. He just stared past me, his wide, tear-filled eyes fixed on something behind me. A chill ran down my spine. Before I could turn around, I heard a deep, gravelly voice. "You shouldn't have done that." I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing there was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a hood pulled over his face. In his hand was a crowbar, its metal glinting under the flickering streetlight. Pure panic set in, and I bolted toward my car. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. I could hear his footsteps behind me, heavy and fast. As I reached my car, my hands fumbled with the keys. My fingers were trembling so much I almost dropped them. Just as I got the door unlocked and threw myself inside, he slammed the crowbar against my window. The sound was deafening, and for a split second, I thought the glass would shatter. He raised the crowbar again, yelling something I couldn't make out. I scrambled to start the engine, my entire body shaking. The moment the car roared to life, I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as I sped out of the lot, my headlights cutting through the darkness. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, the crowbar hanging at his side, watching me disappear into the night. Once I was a safe distance away, I grabbed my phone and called the police, barely able to get the words out. I told them everything. The crying child, the man with the crowbar, the minivan. They assured me they would send someone to check the rest stop immediately. Later that night, an officer called me back. They found the minivan, but it was empty. No sign of the man or the child. The officer then told me something that made my stomach churn. The minivan matched the description of a vehicle connected to multiple disappearances along the highway. Women traveling alone had been lured in by the sound of a crying child, only to be attacked and never seen again. I was the first one who had managed to get away. I couldn't stop thinking about the child. Was he real? Or was he just part of the trap? I'll never know. But that night changed me forever. I still drive that route occasionally, but I refuse to stop, no matter how tired I am. I don't care if I'm running on fumes or about to fall asleep at the wheel. I'll never pull into a rest stop again. Some nights, when I'm lying in bed, I replay it all in my head. The sound of the crowbar against my window, the man's gravelly voice, the child's terrified face. It's all burned into my memory. And the scariest part, he's still out there, waiting for his next victim. My name's Michael. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. A few months ago, I had to drive out of state for a work conference. It was a 6-hour drive, and since I'd left later than planned, it was already dark when I hit the road. The rain hadn't stopped since noon, making the drive feel even longer. I've always hated driving at night, especially in bad weather. About halfway through my trip, I saw him. A man standing on the side of the road, drenched and shivering, holding out his thumb. His clothes were soaked through, and he looked miserable. Normally, I would have driven right past him. I've never been the kind of person to pick up hitchhikers. It just feels too risky. But something about him made me hesitate. He didn't look threatening. He was thin, maybe in his late 40s, with a pale face and a defeated expression. The rain was pouring so hard I could barely see him as I slowed down. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. As soon as I rolled down the window, he leaned in and stammered, thank you so much. My car broke down a few miles back. I just need a ride to the next town." I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to drive away, but the desperation in his voice made me feel guilty. I unlocked the passenger door, and he climbed in, dripping water all over the seat. "Thank you," he said again, shivering as he buckled his seatbelt. "I've been out there for hours." "No problem," I replied, forcing a smile. "Where are you headed?" He mentioned a small town about 20 minutes up the road. As we started driving, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping over me. Something about him didn't sit right. At first, he made small talk, where I was headed, what I did for work, but his answers about himself were vague. He said his car had broken down, but when I asked what kind of car he drove, he paused for a moment too long before answering. A sit-in. He didn't mention a make or model. The conversation died after that. The only sounds were the rain pounding on the roof and the windshield wipers scraping back and forth. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He was staring straight ahead, his hands resting stiffly on his lap. His wet clothes clung to his body, and his breathing sounded uneven. The uneasy feeling grew stronger. I couldn't pinpoint why, but something was off. About 10 minutes later, we passed a gas station. "I'm going to stop here real quick," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He immediately tensed. "Why? Just keep driving. The town isn't far." I forced a laugh. "I need to fill up, and I could use some coffee. It'll only take a minute." "No," he said sharply. "I don't want to stop." That's when the alarm bells in my head started screaming. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and my heart began to race. "I'll just be a second," I said firmly, pulling into the gas station despite his protest. As I parked, he leaned toward me. His voice dropped, and he said, "You're making a mistake." I froze. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. I couldn't tell if it was a threat or a warning. "I'll be right back," I muttered, trying to sound casual. I grabbed my wallet and stepped out of the car, my legs shaking. The gas station clerk, a young guy who looked barely out of high school, greeted me as I walked in. I forced a smile and whispered, "I think the guy in my car is dangerous. Can you call the police?" The clerk's eyes widened, but he nodded and quickly disappeared into the back room. I pretended to browse the snack aisle, keeping an eye on my car. The man was still sitting there, but now he was watching me. His eyes followed my every move, and I felt trapped under his gaze. A few minutes later, 2 police cars pulled into the lot, their lights flashing. As soon as the man saw them, he threw open the passenger door and bolted into the ring. The officers chased after him, and within minutes, they had him in handcuffs. One of them came over to talk to me while the other searched the man. "Are you okay?" the officer asked. "Yeah," I stammered, still shaking. He said his car broke down, but something about him didn't feel right. The officer nodded grimly. "Good instincts. He's been on our radar for a while. He's wanted for the murder of 2 drivers who picked him up on this highway. You're lucky you stopped here." I felt my stomach drop. The man I'd let into my car, who I'd driven for miles, had killed people in my exact situation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't stopped at the gas station. Now, every time I see someone hitchhiking, I feel a pang of guilt. But I reminded myself of that night. No matter how desperate someone looks, I'll never pick up a hitchhiker again. My name is Alex Carter. I'm 28 years old and live in the suburbs of Chicago. I've always been cautious by nature, never the kind of guy to take unnecessary risks. But that night, my judgment failed me. That night, I learned that some roads are better left unexplored. I was driving home after visiting an old friend I hadn't seen in years. The reunion was nice, but it had run later than I'd planned. By the time I got on the road, it was nearing 1 a.m., and I still had over an hour to go. I was exhausted, just trying to stay awake. The route was mostly rural, with long stretches of dark, empty roads. My GPS chimed, instructing me to take a left turn onto a dirt road. I hesitated. The road looked narrow, surrounded by thick woods, and there weren't any streetlights. I considered ignoring it and sticking to the main highway, but I was too tired to argue with the GPS. I turned, my tires crunching against the gravel. As I drove, the road seemed to stretch endlessly into the dark. My headlights illuminated nothing but trees and dirt. No signs, no landmarks, just isolation. I started to feel uneasy. I'd always heard stories about people going missing on roads like this, but I told myself to stop overthinking. That's when I saw it. A car was parked on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking weakly. Standing next to it was a man, waving his arms like he was trying to flag me down. My heart rate spiked. He looked desperate, pacing back and forth. I slowed down, unsure of what to do. As I got closer, I noticed the man's clothes were dirty, like he'd been out here for a while. He ran up to my window, yelling something I couldn't hear over the engine. I rolled it down slightly, just enough to catch his words. "Please, my wife's hurt. She's in the car. I need help." His voice cracked, full of panic. Every instinct told me to drive away. Something felt off. But then I thought, what if he's telling the truth? I didn't want to leave someone stranded if they were in real trouble. Reluctantly, I put the car in park and stepped out. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice shaky. "In the backseat," he said, pointing to the car. I approached cautiously, my eyes scanning the vehicle. The backseat was empty. "Where is she?" I repeated, turning back to him. That's when I noticed his hands. They were trembling, not with fear, but with some kind of suppressed energy, like he was holding back from doing something. Before I could process it, I heard movement behind me. A second man emerged from the woods, holding a crowbar. His face was shadowed, but his intent was clear. Adrenaline kicked in. I bolted back to my car, not even thinking, just running. I heard them shouting behind me, their footsteps pounding against the dirt. I barely managed to fling the door open and slam it shut before the first man reached me. I locked the doors and floored it. Gravel sprayed from my tires as I sped away, the men shrinking in my rearview mirror. My heart was racing so fast, I thought it might explode. After what felt like forever, I saw the glow of a gas station up ahead. I pulled in, shaking, and ran inside to tell the clerk what had happened. He listened quietly, his expression darkening as I described the dirt road. "That road doesn't lead anywhere," he said. "It's a dead end." I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't run. Now, I don't trust GPS blindly anymore. Some roads aren't shortcuts. They're traps. I wasn't the type to get sentimental over high school, but flipping through my freshly printed yearbook brought back a weird mix of nostalgia and relief. Graduation was only a few days away, and I was more than ready to move on. I was lying on my bed, absent-mindedly scanning the pages, laughing at dumb inside jokes scribbled by my friends. That's when I noticed something off. There was a picture from the homecoming game, one of those wide shots capturing the student section. Something about the crowd made me squint. There, in the back, barely visible but unmistakable, was a man. He wasn't cheering, wasn't even dressed like a student or a parent. He just stood there, slightly blurred, like he wasn't supposed to be in the shot. I flipped a few more pages. Another candid, this one from a pep rally. My stomach sank. He was there again, standing in the back near the gym doors. Same blank expression, same posture. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe a teacher, a staff member. But something about him felt wrong. I turned the pages faster now, scanning random photos. There he was at the senior bonfire. A group of students were laughing, their faces illuminated by the flames, and just outside the firelight's reach, the man stood watching. No one acknowledged him. No one even seemed to notice he was there. I felt my pulse quicken. It wasn't until I reached the group photos that the unease turned to outright fear. I found the picture of me and my friends, taken on the last day of school. We were all standing in front of the lockers, arms slung over each other's shoulders, smiling. But right behind us, slightly out of focus, was the man. he was standing directly behind me. And this time, he was smiling too. A cold shiver ran through my body. I slammed the yearbook shut. My heart was racing, but I kept telling myself it was some weird editing mistake. Maybe someone photoshopped him in as a joke. Maybe it was just some random guy who had been around and no one noticed. I tried to put it out of my head. That night, while packing for college, my phone buzzed with a text. I assumed it was one of my friends making plans for graduation, but when I checked the screen, my stomach dropped. Unknown number. See you at graduation. I just stared at it, my hands suddenly clammy. My brain fought between wanting to dismiss it as a prank and the overwhelming dread creeping up my spine. I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. I didn't sleep much that night. Every shadow in my room felt too dark, every sound too sharp. I even checked the locks twice before finally forcing myself to lie down. The next day at school, I asked around. No one else seemed to notice the man in the yearbook. Not my friends, not the teachers. Even the yearbook staff had no idea who I was talking about. They pulled up the raw files, and in the original shots, he wasn't there. But in the printed copies, he was. I tried to brush it off, to pretend none of it mattered. Graduation day came, and the whole ceremony felt like a blur. It wasn't until after I walked across the stage, diploma in hand, that I saw him again, standing at the very back of the auditorium. He was grinning. And this time, he raised his hand, just slightly, and waved. I left town the next morning. I don't know who he was, and I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I still get messages from an unknown number. I never answer them. I still think about this night sometimes. Even years later, the memory creeps back when I least expect it. I was never the kind of person to believe in the paranormal, but what happened at my college graduation made me question everything. It was a warm evening, and the ceremony was being held outdoors on the university's football field. Rows of white chairs stretched across the grass, each filled with anxious graduates dressed in identical caps and gowns. I was sitting toward the middle, waiting for my name to be called. The air buzzed with nervous excitement. Occasional bursts of laughter, the murmurs of students whispering to each other. The occasional call of a professor reminding us to stay in line. At first, it was just a passing observation, something my brain registered but didn't dwell on. A girl, sitting at the very end of the row. She was wearing a cap and gown like the rest of us, but something about her was off. Her skin was unnaturally pale, almost grayish under the stadium lights. And she sat perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't fidget, didn't whisper to anyone, didn't even seem to blink. I kept stealing glances at her, feeling a weird sense of unease. It wasn't just her stillness. It was the way no one else seemed to acknowledge her. The students on either side of her left a noticeable gap, as if they were unconsciously avoiding sitting too close. The name-calling continued. One by one, students walked up, shook hands with the dean, and took their diplomas. Cheers erupted with every name. Parents, friends, classmates all clapping, shouting. But she never reacted, never clapped, never turned her head to watch. Then, it happened. The announcer cleared his throat and read a name. Anna Holloway. Silence. No claps, no cheers, not a single sound. I looked around, expecting someone to call out or react, but no one did. The announcer hesitated, shifting uncomfortably at the microphone, as if realizing something was wrong. Then, after an awkward pause, he quickly moved on to the next name, and the moment passed as if it had never happened. But I couldn't let it go. The name felt familiar, and that girl, she still hadn't moved. A strange sensation crawled up my spine, and for the first time, I noticed something else. The wind had been blowing all night, making our gowns ripple slightly as we sat. But hers, Hers didn't move at all. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. I barely registered my own name being called, my legs feeling stiff as I walked across the stage. The only thing I could focus on was her. Every time I glanced back, she was still there, still staring forward. After the final name was called and the hats were tossed into the air, I found myself scanning the crowd, searching for her, but she was gone. I hadn't seen her stand. I hadn't seen her leave. She had just vanished. Something about it gnawed at me. Maybe it was my brain trying to rationalize what I saw, or maybe it was pure unease, but I needed to know. After the ceremony, I approached one of the faculty members, an older professor who had been handing out the diplomas. I asked him, as casually as I could, who Anna Holloway was. His reaction was instant. His expression darkened, his mouth opened slightly like he wanted to say something but stopped himself. Then, after a pause, he gave a small shake of his head. She wasn't on the list. I laughed nervously, thinking he misunderstood. No, I heard her name announced. She was sitting at the end of the row. Pale girl, black hair, really quiet. The professor stared at me for a long time. Then, in a hushed voice, he said, "Anna Holloway was supposed to graduate 5 years ago. She died in a car accident a week before the ceremony." A cold, heavy weight settled in my stomach. That can't be right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I saw her. She was there. I swear. He only shook his head. I don't know what you saw, but she wasn't on the list. I left without another word. That night, I searched the university's records, digging through old class rosters. And there it was. Anna Holloway, class of 2018. My hands felt clammy as I clicked on an old article. The headline sent a chill down my spine. Tragic accident claims life of promising student days before graduation. Anna had been driving home late from a study session when her car skidded on black ice and flipped into a ditch. She had died instantly. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. The girl I saw at graduation, her pale skin, her motionless posture, the way no one sat too close to her. It all made sense now. I closed my laptop, trying to push away the growing fear inside me. Maybe it had been a mistake. Maybe I imagined her. Maybe I was just tired. But then I remembered the silence. Every single student received cheers, claps, whistles. Except for her, somewhere deep down, I knew. I had seen her. She had been there. And no one noticed. Except me. Graduation night had always been billed as a moment of triumph and celebration. A time to mark the end of college life and the beginning of something new. I'd remember the buzz of excitement as I donned my cap and gown, the lingering sense of perfume and sweat in the crowded auditorium, and the applause that reverberated off the walls as names were called. After the ceremony, the building emptied out quickly. Most of my classmates had already gone off to their parties or family gatherings, leaving the auditorium quiet and strangely empty. I was among the last to leave, reluctant to let go of the moment. It wasn't until I reached my car that I realized I'd left my phone charger behind. I cursed my forgetfulness. My phone was already dangerously close to dying, and I needed it for directions home. With no other option, I decided to return to the auditorium, a building that still held the echoes of the ceremony and the nervous energy of our last moments as students. Entering the auditorium again felt different in the fading light. The main hall, once brimming with life, now lay in near silence, illuminated only by a few dim emergency lights. The janitor, an older man whose tired eyes and slow, deliberate movements told of years spent alone in these halls, was busy sweeping confetti from the stage. His presence was oddly comforting in a place that otherwise felt abandoned. I retraced my steps back to my seat in the second row, where I remembered leaving my charger. With each step, I noticed the eerie hush that contrasted sharply with the celebratory chaos of just hours before. The silence was punctuated only by the soft rustle of my sneakers against the cold floor and the distant hum of the building settling. As I knelt down, reaching for my charger, a strange heaviness in the air made my skin crawl. That's when I heard it, a soft, deliberate sound that didn't match my own movements. I froze. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, echoing across the stage in a slow, measured pace. I glanced up toward the stage and saw a figure standing in the center. Dressed in a cap and gown identical to mine, the person was facing away, standing unnaturally still as if caught in a moment that defied time. At first, I thought it must be another student who'd forgotten something. A friend perhaps lost in thought or caught in the nostalgia of the night. Summoning the courage to speak, I called out, "Hey, did you forget something?" My voice wavered in the silence, uncertain if it would be met with an answer. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The figure remained motionless, and the janitor continued his slow sweep along the stage, seemingly oblivious to the strange occurrence. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, came the words. Did they say my name? I felt my heart sink into my stomach. That voice, it was hauntingly familiar. I remember the news from last summer. A student from our class had died in a tragic accident. Rumors had swirled, and the memory of that friend, whose name was never formally announced during the ceremony, had been seared into my mind. Now, before me, stood someone who should not have been there. My mind raced as I tried to comprehend what I was witnessing. The figure slowly turned its head, revealing a face that was unsettlingly blank. A face that seemed to be caught between life and something else. I couldn't tell if the eyes held remorse or if they were simply empty. I asked again, voiced barely above a whisper, "Are you okay?" But the figure did not respond with a reassuring nod or a simple yes. Instead, that chilling whisper repeated, "Did they say my name?" The repetition sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't just a question. It was an accusation, a plea, and a summons all at once. Paralysis gripped me. Every instinct screamed to flee, to run out of that building as fast as possible. Yet I stood rooted to the spot, transfixed by the unspeakable horror before me. Finally, as if the weight of dread had been too much to bear, I turned and bolted from the auditorium. I barely noticed if the janitor or any other presence was following. My only thought was escape. Outside, the cool night air never felt so welcoming as it did in that frantic moment. I didn't stop until I was safely in my car, the engine's hum a small comfort in the midst of my racing heart and frantic thoughts. I left the charger behind on that cold, empty floor, along with something else I wished I could forget. The next day, I returned to the auditorium. Half to recover my charger, half to understand what I'd witnessed. The room was as I had left it, but the charger was nowhere to be found. It was as if it had vanished into thin air, leaving only the unsettling memory of that encounter behind. To this day, I'm left with a lingering question and an unshakable sense of dread. Was it a trick of the light, my exhausted mind, or something far more sinister? A restless spirit seeking recognition on what was supposed to be a joyous night? I may never know the full truth, and perhaps that is for the best. The memory of that whispered question continues to haunt me, an eerie reminder that some moments should remain unexplained.
My name is Emma, and what happened at Morton's dairy farm changed everything I thought I knew about my quiet village. I needed money for college, so I took a job doing night shifts at Morton's farm outside our village in Derbyshire. The pay was good. Too good, really. But Mr. Morton said he needed someone reliable to watch the livestock and check the automated milking systems. Morton was a respected man in our community. Church council member donated to local charities, had owned the farm for 30 years. His son James helped run things during the day, The work seemed easy enough. Walk around the barns every few hours, check the computer systems, make sure nothing was wrong. The farm was modern, everything automated. I mostly just had to be there in case of emergencies. But after a few weeks, I started noticing cars coming and going in the middle of the night. Expensive cars that didn't belong to farming people. They'd park behind the main barn, stay for an hour, then leave. When I asked Mr. Morton about it, he said they were veterinary consultants checking on sick animals. That didn't make sense. The animals all looked healthy to me. One night around 2 a.m., I heard voices coming from the old grain storage building. It was supposed to be empty. Morton had built new storage facilities the year before. I walked over to investigate and saw light coming from under the door. Through a crack in the wood, I could see inside. There were about 15 men in expensive suits sitting on chairs arranged in a circle. In the center was a table with white powder and scales. Money was stacked everywhere. Mr. Morton was there along with James, but so were people I recognized from the village. The bank manager, 2 police officers, even our local MP who lived in the big house on the hill. They were packaging drugs. Cocaine, from what I could tell. Using the farm as a distribution center. I backed away carefully but stepped on a loose board. It creaked loudly. The voices inside stopped talking. I ran back to the main barn and pretended to check on the cows. A few minutes later, James appeared. "Everything all right out here?" he asked, but his eyes were hard, suspicious. "Just doing my rounds," I said, trying to sound normal. The next day, I went to the police station in the next town over. I couldn't trust our local officers. I'd seen 2 of them at that meeting. I told a detective what I'd witnessed, gave him names and details. He took it seriously. Said they'd been investigating drug trafficking in the area but couldn't figure out how it was organized. A legitimate farm operation was the perfect cover. They set up surveillance on the property, but it took weeks to gather enough evidence. Meanwhile, I had to keep working my shifts, pretending I hadn't seen anything. Every night I was terrified someone would realize I knew. Then one evening, Morton pulled me aside. "Emma, I hear you've been asking questions around the village," he said quietly. "About the farm, about visitors we have." My blood went cold. Someone had told him I was talking. "I'm just doing my job," I said. "I know you are, but some jobs require more discretion than others. You understand?" He was threatening me. This man I'd known since childhood, who taught me to drive a tractor when I was 15. That night I called the detective and told him I couldn't wait any longer. They had to move now. The raid happened 3 days later. Police surrounded the farm at 1 a.m. when the next meeting was scheduled. They caught the entire operation. Morton, James, the bank manager, both police officers, and 12 others, including the MP. They found £2 million worth of cocaine, detailed financial records, and evidence the operation had been running for 5 years. The farm's legitimate business was just cover for moving drugs across the country. Morton had been using his reputation in the community to stay above suspicion. No one questioned why successful businessmen visited his farm at night. They assumed it was normal agricultural business. The whole thing made national news. Our quiet village was suddenly famous for all the wrong reasons. 14 people were convicted, including the 2 corrupt police officers. Morton got 12 years. James got 8. I finished college with the reward money the police gave me for helping break the case. But I moved away from the village afterward. Too many people there blame me for destroying families, for bringing shame on the community. The farm was sold to new owners who actually use it for farming. But I learned something important from all this. Criminals aren't always strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes they're the people everyone trusts, hiding in plain sight in places you'd never think to look. When something feels wrong, it usually is, even if the person involved seems respectable, even if everyone else thinks they're wonderful. My name is Tom, and I need to tell someone what really happened at Riverside Farm before the police close the case. I was hired as a farmhand last October. The owner, David Hartwell, seemed normal when we met. Middle-aged guy, friendly enough. He offered good money and a place to stay in his old farmhouse. I needed work badly after losing my job in Manchester, so I said yes. The farm was isolated, 20 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by thick woods. David lived alone in the main house while I got a small room upstairs. He said his wife had died years ago and his grown kids never visited anymore. For the first month, everything was fine. I fed the cattle, fixed fences, helped with harvests. David was quiet but treated me well. Paid on time, cooked decent meals. I thought I'd found the perfect job. Then I started noticing the smell. It came from the old barn at the back of the property. David always kept it locked and said it was just storage. But the smell got worse every day. Sweet and rotten, like meat left out in the sun. When I asked about it, David's whole mood changed. "Stay away from that barn," he said. His voice was different, cold. "That's not your concern." A few days later, I was fixing a water pipe near the barn when I heard something moving inside. Not rats or birds, something bigger. And then I heard what sounded like crying. Very quiet, but definitely human. I tried the door, but it was locked with 3 different padlocks. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that sound. About David's reaction when I asked questions. The next morning, David was gone. Left a note saying he had business in town and would be back in 2 days. This was my chance. I found a crowbar in the tool shed and broke the locks. The smell hit me like a wall when I opened the door. Inside was dark, but I could see a trapdoor in the floor. That's where the smell was coming from. I lifted the trapdoor and nearly threw up. Below was a small concrete room, maybe 8 feet square, and inside was a girl, maybe 16 or 17, chained to the wall. She was alive but barely conscious, thin, dirty, terrified. "Please," she whispered when she saw me, "please help me." I got her out of there immediately, called the ambulance and police while she drank water and ate some bread. Her name was Sarah Mills. She'd been missing for 8 months. Her family lived in Leeds and thought she was dead. She told me David had taken 3 other girls over the years, kept them in that room for months before killing them. She only survived because she was small and could make herself useful cleaning his house during the day. He was planning to kill her soon and bring someone new. When the police searched the property, they found the remains of 4 other girls buried in the woods behind the barn. All young, all reported missing from different towns over the past 5 years. David came back that evening and found police cars everywhere. He tried to run but crashed his truck into a tree 2 miles down the road. Broke his neck and died instantly. Sarah is alive and back with her family now. The other families finally got answers about what happened to their daughters. The case made national news for weeks. I still have nightmares about that smell, about thinking how many times I walked past that barn without knowing someone was trapped inside calling for help. If I hadn't heard her crying that day, Sarah would be dead too. The farm is empty now, for sale, but nobody wants it. I moved back to the city and got a job in a warehouse. I'll never work on an isolated farm again. Sometimes people ask me how I knew something was wrong. The truth is, I almost didn't check. I almost minded my own business like David wanted. That's what scares me most. How close evil can be to normal life, and how easy it is to miss if you're not paying attention. My name is Mark, and I survived something at Blackwood Hunting Lodge that still gives me nightmares. I took a groundskeeper job at a private hunting lodge in the Scottish Highlands. The owner, Richard Ashford, was a wealthy businessman from London who used the place for weekend hunting trips with his friends. The lodge was huge and isolated, surrounded by dense forest. Richard seemed normal enough when he hired me. Polite, well-dressed, talked about traditional hunting. My job was simple: maintain the grounds and help prepare for guests. For the first month, everything seemed fine. Richard would come up with groups of older, wealthy men for weekend hunts. They'd go out with rifles and come back with deer or rabbits. Normal stuff. But then I noticed something odd. They'd leave with huge amounts of equipment for day hunts, but always came back empty-handed. No game, no trophies. Yet they were always excited, laughing and congratulating each other. One day, while cleaning Richard's office, I accidentally knocked over a folder, photographs scattered everywhere. At first, I thought they were normal hunting photos, men posing with their kills. But the kills weren't animals, they were people. Young hikers and campers lying dead while Richard and his friends posed with rifles, grinning like they'd just won a prize. Dozens of photos going back years. I heard footsteps and quickly put the photos back. Richard walked in, watching me carefully. "Everything all right, Mark?" he asked. That night, I saw trucks leaving the lodge toward the restricted forest area. I tried calling police, but the signal was weak. I managed to report what I'd found before the line died. The next morning, Richard came to my cabin with 2 armed friends. "We need to talk," he said. They took me deep into the forest where they had a camp set up. 3 young backpackers were tied to trees, 2 men and a woman terrified and gagged. "Hunting animals gets boring," Richard explained calmly. "No real challenge, but people run, hide, fight back. It's the ultimate sport." They'd been doing this for 15 years, capturing hikers in remote areas, then hunting them through the forest. Police thought these people just got lost in the wilderness. They untied one of the captives and gave him a 10-minute head start. Then they grabbed their rifles and followed. 3 hours later, they came back dragging his body. "Your turn tomorrow," Richard told me. But that night, police helicopters appeared overhead. My phone call had gotten through. Armed officers surrounded the camp just as they were preparing the next hunt. All 6 men were arrested. Richard tried claiming self-defense, but the photos proved everything. Police found evidence of 20 murders over 15 years. The whole group got life sentences. The 2 surviving captives recovered physically, though the trauma stays with them. I testified at trial and described everything I witnessed. The hunting lodge was demolished. The land is protected forest now. I work in a town library these days, somewhere busy where I can see people coming and going. I learned that evil can hide behind expensive clothes and polite conversation. And I'll never ignore my instincts again, no matter how crazy they seem.